Hello and welcome back. So today I thought I would go through all of my stats for my reading in 2019. I don't know if anyone out there really cares about this. I like this kind of stuff. I love watching videos like this. I don't know. I hope you guys find this entertaining. It's fine if you don't. Basically, I've got my iPad here in front of me and I have a whole bunch of different images that I've made or that I've taken off of my Goodreads, basically just showing all of my stats. So let's get into my 2019 reading year stats. So as you can see, I read 52 books this year, which towards the end, I did end up reading some graphic novels and shorter works just so that I could hit that number of 52. But nonetheless, I am very, very proud of myself for hitting 52. You'll see later on just how little I've read in the past years. So 52 is an insane number for me. So I've read 17,330 pages across 52 books. That's a lot of pages. It's pretty close to what I want to hit in 2020. I actually want to hit around 20,000 pages, so I feel like it's doable. Shortest book I read was Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens by J.M. Barrie. This was a book that I read just this month. And then the longest one I read was Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. Not my favorite book, but regardless, lots of people love it, so I gave it a try. The average length of book that I've read is 333 pages, which is a very satisfying number to see all threes, especially since 3 is my favorite number. So that's really exciting for me. Most popular book I read was Harry Potter, the first one, which I read this month, and then the least popular was The Hidden World by Alison Baird, which is a Canadian author, Canadian book. And it looks like my average rating across 2019 was 4.1, which is pretty good, 4.1 out of 5. I seem to have enjoyed my reading this year. One of the first things that I wanted to look at was actually genre breakdown, because I have always kind of had an idea of like my major genre interests, but I wanted to give everything a try this year, at least a little bit. So I feel like I definitely kind of branched out into different genres that I wouldn't normally this year, as well as like staying true to my parent genres. So as you can see in the pie chart here, I've got fantasy making up almost half of my reading this year. I did 42% fantasy, and that's 22 different fantasy books. Runner-up is nonfiction at 19%. I read 10 nonfiction books this year. That's everything from autobiographies and memoirs to more sciencey stuff. Pretty much just a little bit of everything. After that, we've got two categories that really, really surprised me. At 10%, we've got romance and dystopian. This one really surprised me because I have never read romance before, and dystopian is something that I kind of felt like I was over a little bit. But for dystopian, that's actually pretty much the whole dystopian category, or actually, yes, the whole dystopian category is the Selection series of books and the 2 books that came after the trilogy of the Selection. I did count those as dystopian books. Some of the books that I read this year could be counted as like multiple genres, but I just chose whichever one kind of stood out to me the most. So for that one, it was kind of like dystopian. So yeah, that really surprises me. Romance really surprised me as well, just because I've never really seen myself as somebody who would be into romance. I was actually kind of surprised when I was looking up the genres of some of the books that I had read, because I was like, I don't really know what this is. I was surprised how many of them were considered romances. So that was interesting. I could think of like a couple of straight up romances that I read, those being Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston, as well as, what was it called? Cold-Hearted Rake by Lisa Kleypas? Kleypas? I don't know. Those ones I knew were straight up romance books, but the other ones were kind of like, oh, that was a romance book? Oh, okay, yeah, I guess so. I guess it was. So moving on, we've got 6% of the books I read were graphic novels, 4% were historical fiction, sci-fi was 4% as well, and then contemporary, anthology, and other all comprised 2% of my reading, and for each of those, I only read 1 book. So for other, I didn't know what to put this book in, so it was Horseradish by Lemony Snicket, which is just like a collection of little like tips and tricks and tidbits of information. It's really weird. So I didn't know what to categorize it as, so I made it other. The anthology that I read was 1,000 Beginnings and Endings, which was the Asian-inspired anthology and the group book for the Asian Readathon this past year. And then the contemporary that I read was On the Come Up by Angie Thomas. So Yeah. For sci-fi, the 2 sci-fi books I read were Cinder and Scarlet from the Lunar Chronicles. I'm not going to be continuing that series though. I did not really enjoy it very much. Graphic novels, I read The Prince and the Dressmaker, The Only Child, and I read Through the Woods, which The Only Child and Through the Woods were books that I picked up last minute so that I could hit my 52 mark. I'm not ashamed to say it, but I did, like, I'm glad that I picked them up regardless. Okay, so moving on, we've got format. So I wanted to see how many books I listened to on audio, how many books I read on like an e-reader or on my iPad, and how many books I actually read in physical form, whether it be a book that I owned or a book that I took out from the library. So, as it turns out, I did more audiobook listening than I thought I had, which, I mean, I'm not ashamed of it or anything. I don't think audiobooks are a bad thing. I think they're great. But I kind of like, I wish I had done more physical reading because I do enjoy physically picking up a book. But then I also know that a lot of these books, I was only able to get them in a timely manner via audiobook. So 44% of my reading this year was audiobook, so I listened to a total of 23 books. And then my kind of runner-up for format was an actual physical book. 33% of the books that I read were physical books. And then in last place, ebook form, where I did about 12 books in ebook form, and that was 23% of my reading. And I find that really, really strange. I don't know why. I feel like I go through moods where like I love reading on an e-reader and then I hate reading on an e-reader, and it's just like, maybe I'm just like too undecided about it, so I kind of avoid it. I don't know. Maybe it's subconscious. So another thing that I wanted to look at was kind of the age ranges that I was reading in. And I wanted to be pretty broad about this. I pretty much just said like what was children/middle grade, what was YA, and what was adult. I think all of the nonfictions I just put into the adult category. So I read 10 children's books, making up 19% of my reading this year. And then I read 20 adult books, making up 38% of my reading, which really surprised me actually, because I thought that I would for sure, like when I first started this year of reading, I for sure thought that I would mostly be reading YA books. I mean, I was mostly reading YA books. I read 42% of my reading was YA books in 22 books, but I'm really surprised that adult and YA are kind of neck and neck, like they're not that far off from one another, because I definitely thought YA would be dominating, but it wasn't, and I'm totally cool with that. Those are all of the pie charts that I've made myself, and now I'm going to just move on to the Goodreads stats. So if you don't know, every year Goodreads will basically give you an organized, summarized stats page where you can look at different aspects of your reading and compare it to different years or different times within the year that you're in. So I'm just going to go through those. So first thing we've got is books, just in total, from when I started my Goodreads account until now. So I've actually been on Goodreads for a very, very long time. It's been about 9 years that I've been on Goodreads, but I have used it like kind of on and off. So basically you can see here I had my Goodreads account back in 2011. I would have been in grade 11 at this point, I believe. I was not logging books at this point, so I wouldn't say that like, oh, I only read one book in 2011. I just wasn't into the habit of logging them. 2015 is an interesting year, and the only reason why it jumps up to 12 is because I took a children's literature class over the summer, and I had to read a bunch of books within like 2 months because it was like a condensed class. So that's why that's like that. 2016, 2017, I was in my upper years of my biology degree, and so I was just like, you know what? I'm not gonna read, which I'm a little ashamed of, but it's fine. I was reading lots and lots of scientific literature. And then 2018, I started to discover Booktube and kind of get into that. And towards the very end of 2018, I picked up a couple of books just to see if I could get back into reading at all. And luckily I did. So 2019, I read 50 books more than the previous year. 2019 was the first year of my year off. So if you don't know, I'm on a year off between my undergrad and my master's degree. I'm hopefully going to be starting a master's degree later this year. Everything's still kind of in the planning stages right now, so I can't say for sure, but that's the hope. And so 2019, I was off. No school. So I had a lot more free time. And one of the things that I wanted to do was kind of rekindle some of the hobbies that I felt that I had lost when I was in my undergrad, because I was so focused on my degree that I just kind of like dropped all of my hobbies, and it was not healthy, and I don't recommend it. If you guys are interested in hearing about my university time, let me know. I'm thinking I might get into that more so like when I start grad school at some point in the future. I don't know, if you guys are interested, let me know. So anyways, 2019, I made it a big goal of mine to get into reading in a big way. And here we are. So moving on, pages. So this obviously follows a similar trend to the previous graph or figure. This year I read 17,330 pages, and I'm really happy about it. I think that's a really, really good improvement. Moving on to publication year. This one is super interesting to me, like freakishly interesting to me, because obviously you can see at the bottom on our x-axis, on our horizontal axis, you've got the years, and then on the y-axis or the vertical axis, you've got the year that books I was reading were published in. It's really cool. Like if you look at between 2015 and 2016, pretty much right in the middle where like the months of like June, July would be, you can see that there's like a very straight vertical line of a bunch of data points of books that I read, and they date from like the mid 1860s up until the 2000s. And very obviously, this is when I had my children's literature course. And it goes to show that the curriculum of that course was fairly well spread out across history, because it literally is a range from like the 1860s to the 2000s. So that's really cool to see visually. It's also really cool to see that they are all almost perfectly like one on top of another, which pretty much signifies that they were all read within a certain amount of time. So that's really, really interesting to me. I don't know if that's interesting to anyone else. It's just kind of cool to see it like visually represented. Maybe I'm just a nerd. Something else that really sticks out to me from this graph is the fact that most of the books that I read this year were published after the year 2000. And I don't know like if that's something I'm gonna actively try and change in the new year, but I kind of want to. I kind of feel like I should want to. Like, I should want to read books from throughout history, not just current stuff. So I don't know, that might be something that's kind of in the back of my head this year as we move into 2020, but I just think it's really interesting to see that like all of the books that I read this year are like clustered up in the corner there. That's really, really interesting that most of them are like recently published works. All right, moving on. The last two figures that I have from Goodreads are books over time and pages over time, and they pretty much are the same graph, which kind of makes sense. The more books you read over time, the more pages you'll probably be reading. So you can see from the books over time graph, I pretty much have only read consistently in the year 2019, and just kind of like sparingly in the past. You can also see that I only read one book in August and in October of this year, which is, I mean, I'm not proud of it. I kind of wish that I had gotten to read a little bit more in that like August to October time point, but I was on a trip during that time, so I don't hold it against myself. But next year, if I have months like that, I'm going to be very disappointed in you, future Nicole. No, I won't. It's fine. It happens. Life happens. Yeah, anyways, moving on to the pages over time. Again, it's a very, very similar graph to the other one. It's just the y-axis is different, or the vertical axis is different, and it has to do with page count. And it looks like my best month for reading in terms of pages in 2019 was actually January. I know I started off the year really strong in 2019, and I read about 2,400 pages, and that's pretty cool. And I'm hoping that I can do something like that a little bit more consistently in 2020. So that's pretty much it. That's everything I have to tell you guys. Let me know what your stats were like for your 2019 reading year. Let me know if you pay attention to your stats or if they're just kind of like secondary to you enjoying your reading experience. I totally understand that too. I am just a huge nerd for numbers. I love seeing graphs and numbers and stuff. So I really wanted to share this with you guys. But yeah, let me know what you guys think about maybe my numbers, about certain books that I've read that you know of, and let me know about your reading experience in 2019. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do not hesitate to like and subscribe for future videos just like this one. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!